Funding for this program was made possible by a Vestlage grant from the National Speleological Foundation. Additional funding was provided by the Western Cave Conservancy. Visit them online at westerncaves.org.
Science is about finding answers. And how far you'll go to get those answers. One visionary scientist is on an epic quest to understand Earth's climate. Dr. Gina Moseley is looking for clues in the most remote and unlikely places. Caves. Stalagmites, thousands of years old, reveal secrets from the past. But some are accessible only to a brave few. At 300 feet below the Earth's surface, there is no light, no air, no room for error. Join this adventure into the world's most hidden realms and find out what it takes to solve Earth's greatest mysteries. Ancient Caves. A film for IMAX and giant screen theaters.
Hey everybody, it's a real honor to be here speaking to the NSS. I don't think I ever thought I'd be doing this. This is pretty cool. I want to tell you guys a little bit about the film Ancient Caves and how it came to be. So my name is Jonathan Bird. I am the director of the film, and I was also the director of photography. So I shot all of the underwater footage and a vast majority of the above water footage. And so what I do is underwater cinematography. That's my passion. I produce a series called Jonathan Bird's Blue World on YouTube. It used to be on PBS and we moved to YouTube in 2013. And it's sort of an underwater science adventure series. And for years and years we focused on mostly just marine life. I wasn't really interested in shipwrecks unless they had marine life on them, and I certainly wasn't interested in caves because I didn't think of cave environments as really having much in the way of marine life. And that sort of changed when we decided to do some segments down in the Riviera Maya region south of Cancun a few years back. And while we were there, we decided to do an episode about cenotes. So we got a local cave diver that took us into some cenotes to film. And I have to say, I was taken aback by just how beautiful those environments are. And I still was kind of against cave diving because I had this vision in my mind of cave diving being very risky and again, not really worth the trouble because there isn't marine life that's really worthy of my attention for the show in these environments. So we did the segment in the cenotes. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And so we started doing a few more segments that were based around quasi-cave type diving. In cenotes. And eventually it got to the point where a friend of mine who's a certified cave diver, she said, you know, you're really starting to do stuff that seems like cave diving and you're sending the wrong impression out there because you're not cave certified, you're not diving in cave gear. And we were diving with cave instructors, and we were cavern diving, meaning we could see the light at all times, but we were still giving this impression of cave diving in the show when we really weren't cave certified and we weren't doing it right. So I decided, all right, if we're going to keep doing these kind of segments occasionally, I should get the training. And I had just seen an article in National Geographic magazine that was, nowadays considered a pretty famous article by Wes Skiles with a double-page spread of this amazing cave in Abaco. And I really wanted to see this cave, the Crystal Caves of Abaco. And it turned out that Brian K. Cook, who's kind of the cave diver guy on Abaco and a world-renowned cave explorer, he was the person that I would be working with if I ever wanted to get into that cave and film it. So I thought, he'd be the perfect person to go to for my cave training. Most people, when they get their cave scuba certification, they do it in Florida or in Mexico because it's cheap. I ended up going to Abaco to do it because of Brian, and the flip side of that was that most people consider the Crystal Caves of Abaco to be kind of like the Mount Everest of cave diving. They're kind of renowned as the most beautiful caves in the world for diving, and I did my training there. So it's kind of like I did my mountain training on Everest. So I am a little spoiled. When I finished my training, which took, 9 or 10 days, because I did all of the classes back to back, what Brian calls 0 to hero. So I was an open water diver, and when I started, and I was a side mount full cave certified diver when I finished. I had to learn side mount, and then I had to take all the classes. There's 4 classes between open water and full cave. When I finished that training, we got to go film the caves for Blue World. So we went in there and we filmed for 2 days, and I had a really great time. And when I came back, I thought to myself, this is the idea that I've been looking for an IMAX film. And to back up and tell a slightly different story, if you're a documentary filmmaker, you have definitely dreamed about making an IMAX film, because IMAX is the greatest format in the world that is used for documentary filmmaking. And historically, this type of film was made with 65 millimeter motion picture film, projected in these giant screen theaters that have a screen that's hundreds of feet wide, and it's an amazing format. In recent years, the digital technology has gotten to the point that we can make IMAX films with digital cameras, and with digital cameras comes longer film loads, much more modest lighting requirements. Basically, a lot of technological advances have happened where we can take cameras into these environments and lights into these environments that just 5 years ago we could not have done this, and we could not have made a film in the Crystal Caves of Abaco because the camera wouldn't fit, the lights weren't bright enough, the lights wouldn't burn long enough, you didn't have enough film load in the camera. There were just so many reasons you couldn't do it. And now we could. And I had been thinking about doing a giant screen film about sharks because, again, I like marine life, I like underwater subjects. Sharks are a good topic, they sell. And here I was in this cave in Abaco looking at these formations and thinking to myself, this is the most beautiful place that I've ever seen on this planet. And very, very few people will ever see this because they don't cave dive and they're never going to come here. And what a way to show the world this incredible place, to do a giant screen film about it. Now, I had no funding, had no experience making IMAX films, and I had precious little to go with, but Brian was game to help me out, and I delved into trying to figure out how to make a giant screen film about cave diving, basically. But we needed a story, because a good film has to have a good story. It can't just be a bunch of pretty pictures. So the first thing I did was I started digging around to figure out what kind of science is being done in caves that would make a good story. And I found an article online about a scientist at the University of Minnesota named Dr. Larry Edwards, who is considered the father of cave paleoclimatology. He didn't invent it, but he perfected it. And I called him up and I said, hey, I'm fascinated with this science that you're doing. Can you tell me some more about it? And he told me all about it. And I said, wow, this is a great story for a giant screen film. Do you want to be in this film? And he said, well, sure, but I don't really go into caves. And I'm like, you're the father of this cave science. You don't do caving? He's like, no, man, I'm claustrophobic. I don't go into caves really. And I said, okay, well, who's your Indiana Jones? Like, who's the person you work with that does a lot of that field work? And he said, Dr. Gina Moseley. So Gina is a cave paleoclimatologist that has worked with Larry for many years. And she kind of does both. She does the lab science, but she also loves caving, and that's how she got into it. So I called her and I said, hey, we got this idea for this film. Are you interested? And she was intrigued. Gina's personality is not super like, yeah, I want to be a star. I mean, she's a little bit quieter, and she was a little hesitant, but then she said, yeah, I'd be interested in being a part of it. It sounds like a lot of fun. Well, it turned out she was going to be in Minnesota doing some field work in 6 months or something like that. So we decided to hook up and do some local caving there. There's some great caves in Minnesota. Dry caves, and I say dry caves is such a misnomer. I mean caves that are not submerged. I've never seen a dry cave. I'm sure there must be some, but it seems like all the ones that I end up in, dry caves, are really quite muddy, and they're not dry at all. And this is where I learned that I much prefer swimming through the caves than walking through the caves, or I should say crawling, climbing, slithering on the flooring, because dry caves are a mess. Let's just say cave diving is a way better way to see caves. Just saying. Not biased or anything. Any case, so we went down to Minnesota and we did some caving, and we filmed a sequence that ended up in the film of Gina collecting a sample in one of these caves in Minnesota for study. And she's extremely adamant that you do not break anything in a cave, even for science. So we spent an inordinate amount of time looking around for things that were suitable, that were already broken. And she insisted that we do this in the underwater sequences too, and I'll get to that. So in any case, we shot a sequence, and then it looked pretty good, and we needed to find some funding. And we approached an organization called the GDTC, the Giant Dome Theater Consortium. And I was interested in making a film that would look really good on dome IMAX theaters. And this is a style of film that let me back up, only 20% of the giant screen theaters in the world are domes. They have screens that are hemispherical, almost like a planetarium, but it's not overhead like a planetarium, it's tilted, and then they have seating at an angle like a stadium, and when you're in the audience, you're enveloped by the image. And I grew up in the Boston area, and our local IMAX theater was called the Mugar Omni Theater. It was an Omni IMAX or an OmniMax theater, and it had one of these hemispherical screens. And I grew up thinking that all IMAX theaters were domes, had hemispherical screens. And the first time I went into an IMAX theater that didn't have one of these screens, I was pretty well convinced that I'd been hoodwinked, and this was not an actual IMAX theater. It turns out there are two kinds. There's the IMAX theaters that are flat, that are predominantly 3D, and then there's the IMAX theaters that are dome, that are 2D, but they have this very immersive experience. And because only 20% of the theaters are domes, most films get made in 3D for the flat screen, and then they kind of try to convert them to dome format to make them look okay in the domes, and they have mixed levels of success with that. I wanted to make a film that would look good on the dome as its primary screen, and then the conversion would be made to the flat. And that was kind of my cool, what makes my film different pitch when I was trying to find funding. So I went to the GDTC looking for some money, and they agreed to give some seed money to the project. Gina and her team had a long-term project going at Devil's Hole in Nevada. And this is a cave that very few people have been in. The cave where they're working is not the Devil's Hole with the pupfish. The cave where they're working is Devil's Hole Cave, which is about 200 yards up the hill. And they're pretty sure that they connect somewhere deep underground, underwater, but nobody's found the connection yet. But it's a cave system that's similar, but since the water is underground, completely in the dark, there's no pupfish or anything in there. But they still don't want people in there getting killed, so it's completely locked. It's off limits. It's a park service property, so you basically can't get in without a special permit. Very few people have been allowed to dive in Devil's Hole Cave. And because we were going to be working with Gina's team on a film project, and we were actually going to be getting some deep water samples for her research as part of that, we were able to get permission to piggyback on her permit. But it had a very distinct time window. So we had to be there when they were going to be there. So we needed money, and we needed it by a certain time. And the GDTC agreed to give us some seed money to do this. And we went and we did it. And we only had basically 4 days of diving that we could do in this project, basically 2 dives a day. So we had 8 dives to get the whole sequence. And the first dive was basically a scouting dive because nobody that we knew had ever been in there. We didn't know anything about the cave. We didn't know how we were going to shoot it, where we were going to light it. We didn't know anything about it. We had to go figure it out. And so Brian K. Cook and Mike Young of Kiss Rebreathers, they were the technical dive team. And then Todd Kelly and I were the filming team, the filming cave divers. And the 4 of us basically had to shoot that whole underwater sequence in 4 days. And it was a miracle we did it. I still can't believe we pulled it off. And it looked pretty good. And that was the beginning of Ancient Caves, because from that point on, we had proven that we could do it. We could do it with these cameras. We could do it with these lights. We could do it with this team. And it became an adventure, sort of following Gina and her team around the world, doing research, documenting what they were doing, and at the same time, actually assisting in their research by getting samples for them. So it was really fun. We weren't just the film crew, we were also helping with the science. Of course, the culmination of the film was to end up in the Bahamas at the Crystal Caves and get to go in there for a sample for Gina. So that was part of the story. We were getting her a sample so she could look at sea level change data. And along the way, we would get to see some amazing things so that the audience could feel like they are diving in the Crystal Caves of Abaco. So we took a journey back to a room that's about a half a mile back from the entrance called Fangorn Forest, named after the Tolkien place. And along the way, we filmed all the things that are kind of famous in those caves, the frozen rain formation, just a whole bunch of different rooms that are really cool. And even though it looks on the film like a single dive, obviously each setup takes a lot of time, and it's not one dive. It actually took 2 weeks, 14 days of filming to film the dive where we went to Fangorn. And of course, only one actual day of filming did we go all the way to Fangorn, which is a double stage dive, which means you start the dive with 5 scuba tanks, and one of them is your O2 bottle that you're going to deco on that you leave at 20 feet in the entrance. But the other 4 you carry with you, and you stage them along the way, and then stage them back on the way back. So that's a dive that takes about 3 hours with deco. So it's basically an hour in and an hour out, and then an hour of deco. So it's a pretty long dive. It's a half a mile swim. And you know, you think about it on the way, you think about that half mile swim, that you're going a half a mile, swimming an hour away from your only exit. It gets in your head a little bit, but it's a really great adventure. So finally we got the film made and released, and the funny thing about it was I spent 4 years making my first IMAX film, from the start to the finish, from the research and finding money and shooting it and post-production and delivering it. 4 years. 1 week after the film was released, every single IMAX theater in the entire world closed for more than a year due to COVID. So we're re-releasing it right now. It was only released in 1 theater, so it wasn't really released. It's being re-released in theaters all over the world, starting pretty much this fall. And a lot of people have asked me, when will it be in my local theater? The thing you need to realize is that these kind of movies, these institutional documentary IMAX movies, are not released on 1 weekend in all the theaters like a Hollywood movie, and then it plays for 3 weeks and then it's gone. They don't work that way. A theater is typically associated with a museum, and the museum will open that film when they feel the time is right. It might be 2 years from now, because they've already got 2 years of movies planned, or they are planning to open it with a climate change exhibit, or they're planning to open it with some other exhibit that goes with the film. So these films typically open at most theaters that they're going to open in. They usually open within 3 years of the film being released, and then they typically run for at least 6 months in that theater. So you have plenty of time to see it. So that's the good news. So we don't actually know when it's going to open in any individual theater. We sort of hear as they tell us they want the film. So right now it's only open in like 3 theaters in the world, but you rest assured it will open in a lot of theaters over the next couple of years. The other thing is that if you live near a dome, if you live near an Omni theater, an IMAX dome, there's a very high probability that they will want the film, because it was one of the only films shot native for domes in the last 30 years. So if you have the opportunity to see it on a dome, you really should. It's quite an experience on a dome. It still looks great on a flat screen, especially in the 3D version. It's really the Abaco sequences in 3D are amazing, but as a whole, if you can see it on a dome, that's the best way to see the film. So I hope you will see it. And thank you for having me as a speaker here at the NSS. And be safe in all your caving, everybody.